Okay, today's lesson is going to be mostly review. We're going to spend some more time in class putting all of this together, so I'm just going to remind you of some things. We're on 9.2, multiplying and dividing rational expressions. So the first thing that you always want to take a note of, we always need to first factor out the top and the bottom. So we're going to factor the top and the bottom. In a minute, we're going to list some of our factoring rules, so you may want to leave some space over here so that we can make a note of those. The second thing we're going to do is name any excluded values, which we talked about today. And when we talk about excluded values, we specifically just are talking about the denominator. So you may want to make a note that the denominator cannot equal 0. Denom cannot equal 0. And then the third thing we're going to do is we're going to cancel / multiply / divide. So I'm going to write that out kind of all as one thing. We're going to multiply, divide, and then cancel is also something we're going to do in that step. And at the end, we would just want to write our final answer. And you're going to see all of this in action. This is just something you should probably have as a cheat for yourself so you don't get stuck when you're working these problems. So back up here to factoring, I want you to remind yourself of some factoring rules, or some factoring patterns. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a cheat tomorrow in class, but you all really do need to know how to factor these things. It's going to make it so much quicker, and it's going to help for your state test. So for factoring, we have GCF, which you should always take out. That's one of the methods. We have shortcut, which is when A is 1, the first number is 1, and we pick two numbers that add to give us something, and they multiply to give us something else. We've got AC, or bottoms up, which is very similar to shortcut. But remember, you're going to have a fraction somewhere. And then we've also got difference of squares. So an example of that would be if you have like 9x squared minus 25. Remember, that becomes 3x plus 5 and 3x minus 5. And then we also have difference of cubes. I don't know if we're going to see this in our lesson, but it's just a good reminder. An example of that would be like 8x to the third minus, we'll say 27. So remember, take the cube root, that's 2x minus 3. You may need a calculator, and then square the first, 4x squared, square the last, plus 9, and then multiply and change the sign, which is going to give me plus 6x. Just keep in mind those factoring patterns. You should probably have those written at the top of your notes also. Okay, so here we go. Here's our first problem. One thing you may want to take a note of at the beginning of this problem before you copy it down is that when you multiply fractions, so to multiply fractions, we're going to multiply straight across. And you're going to see what that means here in just a minute. So first thing that we said on the other one was we wanted to factor. So I'm going to factor each one of these problems, and I'll kind of try to color code for us. So I'm going to do red, blue, we'll do purple up here, and then green for this bottom one. So on the top there, that red equation, if I factor that, all I can really do is I can't really do anything. I may be able to break something down, but 3x squared works for me. This blue equation down here at the bottom, that's my two numbers. So I want to pick two numbers. I'm just going to kind of think here at the bottom, two numbers that multiply to give me -8, and I want them to add to give me -2. And those numbers are going to be -4 and +2. So my factors are going to be x minus 4 and x plus 2. All right, check me, make sure that I'm picking the right numbers. All right, let's switch over to purple here. So now I'm looking at this top equation on the other side. There is a GCF there, so I can pull a 2 out to begin with. So there's a 2 completely out of that problem. which means my new problem is now x squared minus 3x minus 10. So I need two numbers, one that multiply to give me negative 10, add to give me negative 3. Those two numbers are going to be negative 5 and positive 2. So x minus 5, x plus 2. And then at the very bottom, notice that the green equation is the same as my purple one was, except for without the GCF. So I actually already know those numbers, x minus 5 and x plus 2. Okay, all of what I just did, that whole first step, you should probably have labeled, this is my first step, which is to factor. That's all I've done so far. All right, and then the second step we said we needed to do was to list my excluded values, which means I'm looking at the bottom. On these, we don't even have to name what type of excluded values they are. We just honestly have to list them. So I've got x cannot equal, I'm just reading across. 4, remember it's in parentheses, so I got to think opposite. So 4, negative 2, positive 5. Since negative 2 is happening a second time, I don't need to list it. So 4, negative 2, and positive 5. Those are my excluded values. All right. Step 3 was to either multiply, divide, or cancel. So multiply and cancel. So if I look here, multiply, I'm going to go straight across, which means I've got two fractions. See that I have two big fractions right here. And since I'm going straight across, I'm actually just going to put a big line and make them one big fraction. I can even go in and add a multiplication sign in here if I want to, but all the top pieces are being multiplied, all the bottom pieces, that's all multiplication. So really, multiplication is just going to push it all together into one fraction. Canceling is anything that's on the top and on the bottom can cancel out. So I've got x plus 2 and x plus 2. Since they're all one fraction, it doesn't matter kind of where they are. Then I've got x minus 5, x minus 5. And I don't see anything else that cancels, so my final answer is going to be, on the top, I am going to go back and multiply that out on the top, so 6x squared, just because that's easy to multiply. The bottom is not as easy, and it doesn't even really make a ton of sense for us to multiply it out, so I'm just going to leave it in factored form. And then we always want to list our excluded values with that 4, negative 2, and 5. So my final answer is going to be right here. I'm going to put a big orange box around it. There's my final answer. In all honesty, if you remember your factoring rules, this is pretty easy. I think the factoring is what's going to take you the longest out of any of these problems. Okay, so for our division here, you may want to make this note before you copy the problem down. To divide, we're going to use keep, change, flip. And what that means, pardon my handwriting, what that means is we want to keep the first one the same, keep the first fraction the same, change to multiplication, and then we're going to flip the second fraction. We're always going to do this anytime we have division. So let's go ahead and do that to begin with. We just need to set up our problem. So to set that up, we're going to do x plus 7. So the first one we're going to keep the same. We're going to change the division sign into multiplication, and then we're going to flip the second one, which means the denominator is now going to be the numerator, and the same the other way around, the numerator is going to become the denominator. So now we're back to our normal first steps. So the first thing we want to do is factor. So what I want you to do is pause the video and try your best to factor out those 4, and then I'm going to give you the answer so you can see if you've done that correctly. Okay, and there are my factored parts. So if you're struggling with that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a shortcut tomorrow, but you really do need to know how to factor. I can't say that enough. All right, second thing we're going to do are our excluded values. Remember that on excluded values, we need to look at the denominator. And division's a little weird, so I'm going to start by looking at my current denominators. Remember, if x is by itself, then the excluded value is 0. All right, we've talked about that before. So my excluded values here are going to be x cannot equal 0, or -7, or -2. All right, that's me looking at these other two factors on the bottom. And then also, we need to look at the factors that were on the bottom. So because we originally flipped our equation, we're going to kind of look at these also, ours on the top, which means I need to add +1 to my list. Because originally, think this was part of the equation that was originally on the bottom, so it's also excluded. Remember, I don't need to say anything for -2 because we already have that listed. All right, and then our third step that we said before is going to be divide / cancel. So we need to be doing those things. We've already taken care of the division because we rewrote the problem. So now that it's multiplication, remember this is now all one huge fraction bar. So now I'm just looking for some things that cancel. I've got an x plus 2 and an x plus 2, an x plus 7, and one of these x plus 7s. And I'm just going to rewrite everything that I've got left. X plus 7, x minus 1 on the top. And on the bottom, I've got x squared. And my excluded values, I just list with it. X cannot equal 0, -7, -2, or 1. So again, I'll put an orange box around just so you see all of this is part of your final answer. Okay, so that's all we have. All I need for you to be able to answer for me tomorrow is where do we need to spend the most time practicing? Do we need to just spend time practicing canceling? Do you just need me to do one example of each? Is it division, or is factoring the big thing that we need to spend time on tomorrow? You tell me, and then we can go from there.